Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Town of North Andover's Housing Production Plan meeting forum. My name is Andrew Shapiro. I'm an Assistant Town Manager and Director of Community and Economic Development with the town. Why am I speaking into a microphone when there's like 6 people in here? The reason is because we're actually recording this on NA Cam, and so for the audio for the video portion that we're going to be replaying on NA Cam, we wanted to use a microphone. So I hope everyone's okay with using the microphone if we're going to bring up questions or have others talk. But I just wanted to first give a little background on what we're doing here. So we're joined tonight by a couple of my colleagues, Planning Director Jean Enright, Zach Melcher, who's our staff planner. We've also got colleagues who will introduce themselves from the Consensus Building Institute, who is working with our regional planning agency, the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, who is actually working on updating all of the housing production plans throughout the Merrimack Valley for all communities. So we're hoping to, we're undergoing the same process a lot of communities are going through right now. All the communities in the region back in 2018 produced a document, our housing production plan. It sort of examined all the data associated with housing in North Andover, the demographics, what type of housing stock we had, the sort of level of affordability that we had in town, and what we needed to strive to strategically to make sure that we were providing enough housing and enough affordability of housing in town for people to live here, stay here, come here if they're newcomers. And so we had a number of strategies laid out in that plan, and you'll see what some of those strategies are and how we've addressed many of them. But we're here tonight to speak to the updated level of data that's relevant to today, and also speak to maybe what we want to carry forward in our updated plan that will be good for another 5 years. So the last plan does expire at the end of this calendar year. This plan will go into effect next year. It should be done by the middle of next year, really, in working with MVPC. And we'll use that as sort of a guiding document alongside our master plan and in working with, our permitting bodies like the planning board, ZBA, and so forth to hopefully, carry some of those strategies forward. So with that, again, thank you for coming this evening. I know it's tough to come out around the holidays, especially on a night when we're competing with at least one other public meeting out there in town. So again, I appreciate everyone taking the time. And from here, I will pass it over to Abby Fulham, who's with the Consensus Building Institute.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay. Hi, everyone. As Andrew said, my name is Abby Fulham. I'm here with my colleague, Elizabeth Cooper from the Consensus Building Institute. We're a nonprofit that's based in Cambridge. We help groups have discussions, come to agreement. And we're here tonight because we're supporting the Planning Commission to support all the towns to work on their housing production plans and get engagement and hear your feedback. In terms of housekeeping things, I think you know this building much better than we do. There's the restroom there, I think. Yeah, over there. All right. We wanted to lay out quickly how things are going to go this evening. Since we're a small group, I think we can kind of stay in group discussion. We're going to hear a presentation from Lauren on the housing production plan update, what happened so far and where we're headed. And then we're going to have 3 discussions on separate topics, but we'll do it all together. The first is on the housing production plan update. The second is on the MBTA Communities Act. I think there's a lot of questions, so we're going to focus on Q&A for this section. And then the third component we want feedback on is the accessory dwelling units. And then we'll do a quick wrap up. And since there's a small group, we'll see. Maybe we'll go to 8 if we end up earlier. That's okay too. And we have one more item, which is, I don't think this is really important because you all are a small group, but we just wanted to touch on some guiding principles. Basically, we want everyone to be able to share their feedback. So that just involves, like, if you are quieter, we'd love to hear from you. And if you speak a lot, maybe make a little room for other people. And kind of the other most important one here is, like, there are no silly questions. There's a lot of acronyms. We're all trying to understand this as best we can. So please ask your questions. We'll slow down. We'll flag questions for the presenters as we have them. Okay. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Lauren, who's going to introduce the Planning Commission and then this project.
Thanks so much, Abby, and thanks so much for the North Andover Senior Center for hosting us this evening. Again, my name is Lauren Kiesling. I'm a community planner with MVPC, or the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. I think just because we have a smaller group, we're going to quickly start with introductions if folks are comfortable with that. I'd love to just get a sense of who's in the room, resident, or other interests before we kind of dive into who MVPC is, what the housing production planning process is, and then talking about some specific North Andover housing data. So if it's okay, we can kind of start here and do some introductions. Do you want to kick it off, Elizabeth, and then we can kind of go from there?
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Cooper. I work with Abby at the Consensus Building Institute and happy to be here and supporting this conversation.
Thank you. My name is Peter Köstam. I'm a resident in North Andover, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Affordable Housing Trust.
I'm Stan Limpert, also a resident of North Andover. I'm a member of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, and we've been interested in some of these issues as part of that.
Thank you. Here, I'll pass it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ben Osgood. I'm just a resident of the town.
Jay Burke, I'm just a homeowner in town.
Ryan Sharender, I do chair the Old Center Historical District Commission Committee, but tonight I'm just here as a resident.
I'm Patty McPhee, also as a resident.
Eric Halverson, resident.
Great, thank you, folks. And I do want to say just resident, this is who we wanted at this particular meeting, so very much appreciate your attendance this evening. So who is the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission? As Andrew had mentioned in the beginning, we are your regional planning agency, been around since 1959, and there are, I believe, 14 other RPAs or regional planning agencies across the state. We specifically handle 15 cities and towns in the Merrimack Valley region, as south as Lawrence, running up through the coast in Salisbury and Newburyport. And really what our goal is to help the region consistently plan for growth and ensure that orderly growth over time. So we do have the privilege of, as Andrew had stated, helping our 15 cities and towns run through their housing production plan update process. We did have the privilege of doing this back in 2018 and are back for more 5 years later. These plans are on a 5-year cycle, so they are a more acute planning document, if you will, that we hope to act as living documents, especially as the housing landscape changes so rapidly. Especially with issues like COVID-19. Something we'll talk about is how the planning context has changed over time, even in such a short time as 5 years, using COVID as kind of that hallmark incident there. So this is just a list of our staff. We'll kind of pause here. You'll be able to meet the other MVPC staff members as we move forward. So what is a housing production plan? Can I just get a quick show of hands if you have read or are familiar with North Andover's 2018 housing production plan? Incredible. Thank you for making it through. I think it's a 75-page document. One of our main goals with this housing production plan update is to pare down that information so that the plan that you're walking away with is a lot more action-oriented and specific to the specific housing needs around North Andover. So again, a lot of you kind of know the purpose of this plan, but HUPs do allow communities to articulate their specific vision for housing growth as it pertains to some of their population and demographic data over time. Again, we are hoping, especially, I think we've seen a lot of stories about housing in the news recently. We have a lot more legislation coming down the pipeline. I know we're talking about MBTA communities this evening, et cetera. And there also is a pretty large housing bond bill currently in the legislature. So we're excited to kind of be at the forefront of this and hoping that your HUP for North Andover will encompass some of this new and exciting policy coming down the pipeline. But keeping in mind that, resident feedback is of utmost importance. We do understand that everyone views their town in specific ways, want to preserve the character of their town, and might have some hesitation around continued growth, even as the population continues to climb. So we're here to help kind of dispel and address some of those concerns, especially, again, as the state continues to grow in population over time. Really, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the Housing Production Plan's main goal is to stir affordable housing production, but we do like to look through the lens of producing housing of all types. Affordability is definitely addressed in this plan. We want to be able to keep North Andover as close to that 10% threshold on the subsidized housing inventory as we can to give you some 40B protections. But we also want to be able to encourage building housing of all types, especially as it pertains to the unique needs of the population. So sorry about the formatting here, but this is a little snapshot of what the housing production plan process has looked like so far. We've been working with our cities and towns since around October of 2022, and we will be moving through June of 2024 with this process. We are supported by 2 state grants. Tier 1 is public engagement, which is why we're all here tonight. Some of you may have attended the virtual session, sub-regional session we held on September 28th, where we had a lot of similar discussion, but mainly talked about what North Andover has accomplished in terms of housing so far, and just getting some general feedback on some data points there. So some of the data we're presenting tonight may be a little bit similar to what you saw, but we want to just make sure that we're bringing that point home about what those needs might look like over the next 5 years. Tier 2 here is information gathering. As you saw in the 2018 plan, there is no shortage of data to kind of tell your housing story, and there will be a lot of similar data points that make it into your updated plan. But again, we hope that we're doing that in a concise and articulate manner to really paint the picture for you all. And then Tier 3 is goal development, so we're kind of in that mix of Tier 2 and 3 right now, but hoping to have your plan done within the next couple of months. So now we're going to dive into some data, my favorite part. So why is there a housing shortage? Can folks see this graph okay? Okay. It's probably a little iffy, but I'll do my best to explain it. So this is state level data, and I really just wanted to talk about why there is a current housing shortage across the state that kind of helps us zoom in on the housing context for North Andover specifically. So between 1960 and 1990, Mass communities permitted almost 900,000 housing units, and since 1990, those communities have permitted fewer than 470,000 new units. So we almost cut that production in half. Because of this, there's an estimated shortage of 200,000 housing units in the state. We can anticipate that this number is actually much higher, especially because this data that we're using here is only through 2018. But as we can see, what I really want to point out, if you can see this, is this graph starts in 1960. We see kind of big spikes in the 70s, another spike in the mid 80s, and then we've kind of see that production level off and even dip pretty significantly during the 2008 recession. Came up a little bit more, but it's been pretty stagnant in under that 20,000 units per year benchmark across the state. So this is just giving you that statewide context for why there's a lot more in and out migration between communities, even outside of Massachusetts. And because there is such a shortage of housing units, our demand is higher than ever. Vacancy rates are the lowest that they've been historically, and this is directly correlated to the high cost of housing. So in rentals and home values, we've seen those skyrocket because the demand is far greater than the current supply.
Let's go what's the significance of the color?
Oh, thank you. So yellow here is single-family construction, and the blue is multifamily construction. So actually, great point, because as you can see, the majority of here, in the 60s and 70s, you saw that kind of larger proportion of multifamily housing being built, and then over time, you see that proportion become predominantly single-family over time.
But then it's gone back to multifamily.
Yeah, there has been kind of a flip, and I would be curious. I wish we could have some more updated data here, which we will have in your plan closer to 2020 and 2023 to kind of see how that has evened out over time.
Do you know whether the drivers for the multifamily person are economic drivers or demand drivers, or?
Sure. So the question is that, can you say that one more time just so I get your language correct?
What is the driver for the increase in multi-unit production? Economic drivers, any idea?
Yeah, so the question is, what are the main drivers for the increase in multifamily housing development? Is it economic? I would say, from my perspective, and I'm curious to hear from North Andover folks or my other colleagues, is just the value, right? So the cost of land versus what's available. So, right, if a developer is coming in, you have a high cost of land, building multifamily structures is more economically viable, and also creates a larger tax base for those particular properties in any one property. I also, would like to think that developers prioritize multifamily because it addresses our housing shortage quicker. So, right, if we're talking about not only rapidly increasing supply, but also what types of units are people looking for, and we'll kind of go into that in North Andover specific data about, let's say you have a healthy proportion, let's say 30% of the population is 1 to 2 person households, but yet your housing stock only has 3 and 4 bedroom units. Because of that, developers may be interested in coming in and accommodating those studio 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom units, which typically kind of follow that multifamily structure. But curious if others in the room have other thoughts that they'd like to add. Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, has there been a study at all in relation to the amount of land that is available? Because in the 80s, they were building because there was a ton of land available. Now there's not as much. And then also, in addition to that, the ability to build has gotten harder because of codes and the process, and it's gotten more expensive. Has there been any study related to that with these numbers?
Great question. So the question is around, has there been a study about current land available? So there is some communities, community by community, do build-out analyses based on the available parcels that they have. I can't speak specifically for North Andover. If you've done a comprehensive build-out analysis, that's kind of rare. But from a statewide perspective, I would say the same. We haven't really seen any data around a statewide land that's available. And could you just say the second part of your question as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the process has gotten harder, whether it be with the codes, which is good because it makes the house better, but at the same time it's harder, more expensive. Mm-hmm. And then also the process to get approved has gotten a lot harder and more stricter. Has there been any study related to that?
Yeah, so the question is, the permitting and development process is much more difficult over time. So I actually think you touched on a really good point is, no, I don't know of any studies kind of looking into that, but one of the main strategies that other communities have used in their housing production plan is easing that permitting process, so waiving certain fees and expediting, and also creating zoning that is as of right. So folks don't necessarily have to go through special permitting process for certain types of property. We've seen in a lot of our, usually in our smaller towns, but up to our mid-sized towns, is multifamily is essentially illegal, right? You can't build multifamily except without a special permit. That's enter the MBTA communities legislation, which we'll talk about. But that's just one tool in the toolbox about that. But curious, we do know that since Massachusetts is unique in that each town governs its own zoning, that's very touch and go, by each town and city. Yeah.
I think just to note that question about the studies, one of the things to point out is how Ian Burns with the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. The chart pretty also closely reflects when a lot of communities chose to downzone. And so although we might not be citing a comprehensive study, the trend in communities downzoning and going from more single family, think 1 acre, 2 acre parcels and lot mandatory minimums closely aligns with the change in construction. So that gets back to that permitting process more so than there may be land out there because they're all 2 acre lots, but we are restricting that from the zoning, and that lines up with that chart. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. Other questions on this particular data point? All right, we'll keep moving. So again, hopefully folks can see this okay. Please let me know if you can't. Some information about North Andover's demographic trends. So I do want to start by saying these are your town's age distribution projections. These are projections based on the past 20 years of census data, Census 2020 and Census 2010, and bring us through projection out to 2050. So I do want to say that the only real data points we have here, point in time data points, are the Census 2010 percentage and Census 2020 percentage. So what the projections really mean is that they're based on, that point in time data. So if things, let's say in theory, stayed exactly as they were when these data points were taken in the census, this is what your projections would look like. If things change, this distribution is going to change. So just wanted to give that caveat. So what we see here, and what I usually point out in most of our communities, is this blue line here. The blue line represents your 65 and over population. As we can see, that population was roughly around 13% in the 2010 census, and is projected, if things were to stay the same, to climb to 27% of North Andover's total population by 2050. So what this says to us, from our perspective, is that there will be increased need, There's going to be an older population. We have a graying population across all of our region. This is not unique to North Andover. In some communities, that proportion is even higher. But what this tells us is that we might need to start looking at, single floor living, assisted living possibilities, downsizing. Folks who maybe have raised their families here in a 3 or 4 bedroom home are looking to stay, but there isn't necessarily a housing stock, which we'll go into in a second, that could accommodate that. So just wanted to highlight that because that's the biggest change you're seeing. What you're also seeing over time is a decrease in that under 20 population. So that is your green line here. It's roughly around 30% as of the 2010 census, and is projected to decrease to 23% That could also be attributed to cost of living, right? If folks are looking for starter homes that aren't necessarily available, or homes that are at a price point where they're starting, entering a community, starting their families, have younger kids, that could be an indicator. I'm not saying it's directly correlated, but it could be an indicator of that decrease. So curious folks' thoughts on this, if this is surprising, if this is data you've seen before.
A bunch of those people on the blue line sitting in the room here. So.
Yeah. Would we say that that projected need is pretty accurate, that folks may be looking for downsizing, maybe looking for, again, like you might be sitting in a 3-4 bedroom home that has really high value right now, but because housing prices are so high, even moving, downsizing, you might not necessarily be making that profit that you're looking for in your home value.
Yeah, and one floor living becomes a real issue at some point, right?
Absolutely.
So.
Yes, please.
Did you make any investigation about the fluctuation between renters and owners?
So the question is, has there been any kind of research on the fluctuation between renters and owners? Is that related to age specifically, or just the population overall?
In general.
So I'm not sure if we have it as a data point here, but it is something that will make it into your housing production plan. I do know in North Andover, I think and you can correct me on this, Andrew, renter-owner split is roughly 60-40. I could be incorrect about that. Or sorry, owner-renter split. We can get back to you on that, but it is a data point that will be extrapolated and explained in the plan itself. But that's typical. We typically see a higher ownership rate versus renters. And I think for North Andover, since a lot of new rental units have come on the market, you might start to see that shift a little bit, but typically there's a majority of owners. Thank you. Of course. Okay. So North Andover housing conditions. Curious this is my favorite one, so curious what everyone thinks about this. So the pie chart on your left side here is your housing breakdown by occupancy, so how many folks are actually living in the structure. As you can see, you're kind of almost exactly in that 4 quadrants here. You have 1 to 2 person households making up, roughly 54% of, sorry, I'm speaking ahead of myself. So 1 person households, right, are roughly a quarter of your population here. 2 person households are close to 1/3, and then subsequently for your 3 person and 4 person households, 20 and 25% respectively. When you look at your bedrooms per housing unit, you can see that the current housing stock, smallest proportion is in that studio and 1 bedroom, around 10% of your total housing stock. 2 bedrooms is 28%, 3 bedrooms with 30, and then you see the majority, the largest proportion, is your 4+ bedroom homes at 31%. So, in summary, 1 to 2 person households are making up 54%, so over half of your population of North Andover's homes, while 1 to 2 bedroom homes make up 38% of North Andover's housing stock. So we can see that mismatch here about who's living in your homes and then how large are they and how many bedrooms do they have. Similarly, 3 or more person households make up 45% of North Andover's homes, the structure itself, while 3 or more bedroom homes make up 61% of North Andover's housing stock. So as you can see, there is a slight mismatch there, and I think that speaks to the downsizing or starter home issue that we've been talking about a little bit. That we do want to make sure that when our population has these various pockets of how large a household size is, that the existing housing stock is able to accommodate that. Please.
Is this single-family houses?
This is, I believe, housing of all types.
Multis and single.
Yep. So it's regardless of structure.
Sufficient. It includes multis.
What surprises you about it?
That it's mostly 3 and 4. Because I would think with all the apartments that are around are mostly 1 and 2 that I deal with.
How does this compare to other towns?
Question is, how does this compare to other towns? Honestly, I would say that your housing breakdown is pretty similar. Like we see a lot, I would compare you to other towns like Amesbury, Newburyport, mid-size cities and towns do have that kind of equal split of who's actually living in the structure. This is very, very common, is what we're having majority 3 and 4 bedroom houses. Sometimes the proportion is even greater. And I think what sticks out to us a lot is that studio and 1 bedroom is always the lowest proportion of units in structure. And so why, right, that's kind of one of the reasons that we want to explore multifamily housing or, construction by right for certain types of housing. I know a lot of your neighboring communities have explored, let's say, duplexes by right, triplexes by right, et cetera, to not only move through that permitting process faster that we were talking about, but kind of quickly accommodate that mismatch in size because they're also seeing people move in immediately just because that demand is there.
What would these charts look like for Haverhill or Lawrence?
Good question. I'm looking at my colleague who's kind of our data guru in the housing sphere at MVPC. So this shifts a little bit. You see more, right, of that studio 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom just because of the nature of the housing types that are there historically, right? You've had more like just smaller units and multifamily units over time in our gateway cities. But there still is a mismatch of some type to talk about even in our largest cities.
Okay. Thanks.
So the need again, or the mismatch, can you just go over that one more time, because you went through it kind of quick.
Sorry, yes, of course. So the question is just to run through this one more time. So I'm just going to kind of read the narratives here, and please let me know if it's a little bit more clear. Overall, there's a mismatch between how big families are in any one household. So let's say, for example, there's a couple living in a studio or a 1-bedroom. You have roughly a quarter of your population kind of fitting that bill of having 1 to 2 people in that household, yet the units that are available in your overall housing stock, the structures themselves, there's the smallest proportion of studio and 1-bedroom units available, if that makes sense, right? So it's, let's say, actually it's more like half your population is that 1 to 2 person household, but 10% of your total units are studio 1-bedroom units. So there's just a mismatch. It's saying that there's not necessarily the structure we would anticipate a couple living in available. If that's making sense, I hope.
There's a disproportionate amount of people, couples, 1 and 2 person households living in single family homes.
Correct.
That's my take.
Well said.
But so what you need is more 1 and 2 bedroom
Correct.
apartments
That's correct.
and condos?
Yes, yeah, this is housing, it could be ownership or renter. This could look different in a multitude. This could mean a duplex, let's say, with 1 bedroom or 2 bedrooms. They're just smaller units in general. But it's just showing that the bedroom counts are far larger than what might be actually necessary for the population.
It's just amazing with all the apartments that have been built, and I think that's, I'm just saying that we still need more.
But maybe the data hasn't caught up with our current.
I was just going to add real quick, if you don't mind, is also that when you take into consideration the demographic data that was shown earlier, we're aging as a population. So this data actually kind of makes sense on that level because the majority of people that are aging, they're aging in single family homes. They're not typically downsizing into smaller units. And part of the reason for that is because there's a lack of supply, and B, the cost of the housing to downsize in those units is prohibitively expensive. So when you look at, hey, I'm going to sell my single family home for, let's say, $800,000, and I'm going to buy a 2-bedroom condo for $800,000, it doesn't make sense to most people. So I think that's part of what the issue is. We're finding that it's a supply issue, but it's also a demographic issue. And I would also add, a lot of the housing that got built in North Andover over the past 20 to 30 years, single family. A lot of single family home subdivisions, in addition to the condos and apartments that people were referencing. So there's no doubt a lot of multifamily units have been constructed in North Andover and in the region over the past 20 to 30 years as well. But a great deal of the new units have also been single family homes and subdivisions.
So how are you going to solve the problem then? I mean, if you don't have really multifamily zoning, I mean, is it 40B projects? I mean, how do you solve the problem?
We're here to discuss that. I think, you bring up 40B, that's certainly, something that can happen. We're susceptible to 40B because we're under our 10% unit percentage for affordability on our subsidized housing inventory. And tonight we're also going to be talking about the new MBTA communities legislation, which is a state mandate, which requires us to zone for as of right multifamily development. So we're going to have to discuss that. And we're also discussing ADUs tonight, accessory dwelling units, which is a way of diversifying our housing stock, providing more options for people to live in different types of units that can be provided in town. And we're talking about the demographics, right? So if we have an aging population and, younger people are having a harder time buying homes, maybe an option is to allow allow an option for building accessory dwelling units on properties where there are single family homes. Aging parents, for instance, can live in the accessory unit. Their kids can live in the primary residence, and you kind of have like a co-living situation, and it works out for everybody. Or the other way around. Maybe there's kids coming home from college, they can't find a place to live in a more expensive place, and they want to live closer to home, but they want to have their privacy, they want to have their own unit, and they can live at home in a separate unit. Or there's optionality to rent that unit out to somebody else entirely. So that's a discussion we need to have as well if that's a policy decision we want to make as a town.
Thank you. Other questions on this particular data point? Great discussion, so thank you. So this is a perfect segue after what we were just talking about. This is kind of a visual of what we're discussing right now about, creating zoning policy and just allowing certain types of housing to be built across North Andover to accommodate that need and family size. So this is a graphic of what's called missing middle housing. You may have heard this. Definitely hear this cited a lot in conjunction with MBTA communities. But what we've really been talking about here is introducing housing types such as duplexes, fourplexes, townhouse condos, things of that nature, things that might consist of that, let's say, 1 to 2 bedroom, but doesn't necessarily have to be these larger apartment complexes, right? This is really what we're talking about. I can speak from experience. I live down in Lowell, and I live in a townhouse condo. I'm in a unit of 45 units, and you wouldn't even know it. There's only 2 rows of us. It matches the character of my neighborhood, and I love it. And I definitely chose that because of the lower price point, especially in the area, and with the amenities that are around. So just to show you about what housing types might be desirable to not only people who want to age in place, but people who are looking to start their life in a specific community and are looking for housing that kind of matches that price point as well as accommodates their family appropriately. So last piece of data here, and I'll start to move a little quicker. This graphic on the left here, income, rent, and home value percent change from 2000 to 2020. Just wanted to show this, and I do give the caveat that we do extract this data from the census, and we do have the values here. You probably can't see it. We can distribute this later for further analysis. But typically what we see in census data is that reported rent and home value is typically lower than what we see, emphasis on the rent. It is self-reported. So just wanted to give that caveat that the rent is typically underreported. But on the left-hand side here, you see household income has increased 57% over that last 20-year period. At the same time, gross rent has increased 105% over that 20-year period, and home value is reported to have increased 65%. So as we can see, yes, we've had a pretty significant increase in household income over that 20-year period, but it is the cost of rent and home values have far outpaced that in the same amount of time. And this is something, right, this is kind of the crux of the argument here is we're currently living in a housing market that is very, very out of reach to the majority of our residents. And how do we rectify that? First step is to increase our housing supply to kind of level off that supply and demand. So hopefully we can level some of those pricing, but just to show you the reality of how that's looked from 2000 to roughly 2020. And another compelling data point here, just in the affordable housing realm, is the change in your SHI, or subsidized housing inventory percentage, from your 2010 census to now. So in 2010, your SHI percentage was at 8.8, so right under that 10% threshold. And in the census 2020, it has dipped to 7.9. So this is an interesting phenomenon that we see across our communities is as they increase their housing stock, that proportion is going to change. That goalpost is going to change. So when you have more units on the market, you need to make sure that your affordable housing proportion of that is keeping pace. I know that North Andover made huge strides in the past year in passing an inclusionary zoning ordinance. So hopefully you'll be able to, I believe it's right, is it 15%? So for multifamily units over a certain threshold, that 15% affordability will now kick in. So hopefully as your housing stock continues to increase, you'll keep that affordability component stable and, continue to strive for that 10%. But just wanted to point that out there. Any questions or quick comments on this? Okay. So this is North Andover's cost burden. Just as a quick refresh about what cost burden means. A cost burden household pays more than 30% of their gross monthly income on housing. Housing costs can include your rent, your mortgage, your utilities, your HOA fees, your property taxes. It's all kind of looped into that. Severely cost burdened, same kind of categorization, except that means that folks are paying 50% or more of their gross income on housing. I should mention that it is your gross income, not your net income, so that is calculated before taxes. So typically that burden is actually larger than what we've captured here. On the top here, this is representing renters in North Andover. Excuse me. Half of all renters in aggregate are cost burdened. You can see that roughly 15% are severely cost burdened, while the other 15% are just 30% cost burdened. 1 in 4 owners are cost burdened. I think that this typically catches people by surprise. I think we think of renters as being typically more cost burdened, just where they're at in life. But owners, and I think this correlates a lot with the aging community. If you've retired, you're now on a fixed income, but let's say your property taxes keep increasing as your home value increases, that leaves a lot of folks in that 65 and over range in that cost burdened area. So over just roughly a quarter of your owners are cost burdened. And this leaves North Andover overall, and 1 in 3 households are considered cost burdened. So just to kind of drive home the affordability and the importance of the affordability component as we move forward in creating new housing policy.
So that combines renters and owners?
Yes, so up here is renters, owner, but overall is that 1 in 3, yes. Okay, and this is just a quick overview, and then we can move into some HUP strategy discussion on the community impact of housing access. I'm not going to go through each of these points here, but I did want to emphasize how important having adequate housing stock and affordable housing stock is to overall economic development. Something we typically tell our smaller and mid-sized towns is that if your crucial municipal folks, so right, your policemen, your firefighters, your teachers, your nurses can't afford to live in your municipality, that something needs to change, right? A lot of the salaries of those crucial municipal service people are typically more in line in what we'd actually would consider in that affordable housing threshold. And we can talk about that within your plan about what 80% area median income looks like, what those income thresholds look like. But it's absolutely crucial not only to maintain your current town services, but also invite smaller businesses, have more restaurants, have more economic activity. None of that's going to happen if we don't have the appropriate housing stock to not only house those workers, house those business owners, and then also house those customers. So a little on the planning context about where we are now. I know I had mentioned at the beginning that over the past 5 years, COVID-19 was kind of the biggest hit that we saw, and I think it changed a lot of people's perspective on economic development and housing and just the world in general. So that's something that we've taken into account as we move through this update. Each of our communities across the region did experience an expected population increase, even as we see some outmigration from Massachusetts overall. The Merrimack Valley continues to grow, so we definitely need to be considering population as we talk about housing type. The passing and implementation of Section 3A or MBTA communities, we'll talk about that more in a little bit. And then it's an increased awareness of the impact of housing costs and overall health and well-being. I think that speaks to a lot of why people are in this room this evening, but also why housing has been making headlines the way that it has, is because as we look at housing through that commodity lens, we see that not having equal access has big impacts on individual community members and then communities as a whole. So a little bit more about tonight's forum. I'm going to kick us off by talking about some of our housing production plan draft strategies. We'll then hear about MBTA communities, and then we'll dive into discussion about ADUs or accessory dwelling units. How this is going to go is you'll hear me talk for a little bit more because each topic will start with a 10-minute presentation, and then we will we're going to keep it in one just because of a smaller turnout this evening, but we'll have a 20-minute discussion, facilitated discussion about each of those topics to hear your opinions, thoughts, concerns, anything else about each of these. So that's going to be the structure. And I know we're going to start with strategies. I don't know if we should go right into it, if we should take a breather. How are we feeling before we keep going? Okay. Yeah, okay, cool. We can do that. All right, so your housing production plan strategies. I can highly doubt that folks can see this. I'm going to do my best to run through this. This presentation is more so going to be just a teaser, and then we're going to do a flip chart activity, really talking about where each of these strategies are from your 2018 plan, which again, many of you are likely familiar with. We're going to go through the ones that we thought should be prioritized, and then we will move through a prioritization exercise with each of you to make sure that we're getting your thoughts on each of the strategies, but also what we should carry forward in the update. Yeah, please. Yes. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm just like, I'm steamrolling ahead. I am happy to pass the mic to Jean. Thank you so much.
I'm not giving her the hook because of anything wrong with it.
Oh my gosh, no,
Jean knows a lot of these strategies intimately, so I thought it'd be good to have her on this. Thank you.
Hopefully I can add a little bit of context to them. But so now we're going to just kind of go over, since 2018, when we last adopted our plan, what have we accomplished in that time? And these are very brief summaries, brief bullets. There's certainly more that we could have added, but we think these were really strategic and helpful. So first, one of the objectives was to conduct community education. Some of you may remember that a few years back, there was actually a warrant article submitted by a citizen for a housing moratorium. And at that time, we knew education was key at that time, right? We were at the beginning of a housing crisis. And so we conducted, with the partnership of Mass Housing Partnership and Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, a housing forum in 2021. And so that was an online event. It was really well attended. It's a link that you can see on our website today. So it was really centered about education on housing and affordable housing and the status at the time. Another goal in the 18 plan was to consider accessory dwelling unit bylaw, so the actual bylaw being constructed and brought to a town meeting. We haven't actually gotten to that level, but the select board did have a goal for the FY24 fiscal year to start the conversation on ADUs. And so in the past, there weren't necessarily, a lot of positive feedback, but today this housing crisis has changed some opinions on that. And so we've really begun that conversation through a survey that was recently conducted. We had 233 responses to that survey. You're going to hear more about that later. But we thought that was a big step. And so we'll continue that conversation tonight. We'll do more public outreach. We're not of the mindset that we're going to bring forward a bylaw for May's town meeting by any means. But you'll also learn that the state is also taking a step here, and they're considering a bill right now that's going to mandate ADUs in the state, similar to the MBTA communities mandate that, again, you'll hear about more tonight. And if that were to happen, obviously, that's going to kind of step up the need for us to get on board and to have a good, solid bylaw for ADUs. Another goal was to encourage refill and adaptive reuse. We've had a few examples of those. Some of you remember the Ann Bradstreet School. I know Stan certainly does. That was a project that involved actually demoing that school, but replacing it with a commercial development as well as 15 residential units on Main Street, which is really important. Lawrence spoke to the need for people downtown in order to have viable businesses downtown. We also had a Royal Crest redevelopment proposal that required significant zoning changes, which didn't pass. But again, that envisioned certainly a lot more housing, but a mixed-use component within Royal Crest. The town certainly showed support for the Grange building going through an adaptive reuse process to convert to 3 condominiums. Permitting was successful through the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, the Zoning Board, and it kind of had a little hiccup with the Old Center Historic District, so it actually hasn't come to fruition yet. But again, that would have been an adaptive reuse that converted a really underutilized structure, a historic structure, to 3 condominiums. And lastly, most recently, the Planning Board's permitted the redevelopment of the Santander lot on Main Street to a mixed-use building, first floor commercial with 2 floors above, both containing 12 residential units, so a total of 24. It's actually our first permitted inclusionary zoning project, and so those 24 units will yield 3 affordable units through the inclusionary zoning requirements. Seek destination as a housing choice community. So we're in our second round of that, so we've qualified twice now for the housing community designation. And to date, we've been granted over $140,000 in grant funds associated with housing work. That comes up again in 2025, so we'll certainly be active trying to pursue that designation again. So another goal was to adopt an inclusionary housing bylaw, which we stated we did successfully at the 2022 annual town meeting, and that was a unanimous vote, so that was really encouraging. Everybody seems to acknowledge the lack of affordable housing in town. This bylaw, it's not intended to get us to our 10% requirement, but it certainly will help maintain once we do get there. Participate in the Mass Healthy Aging Collaborative's Age-Friendly Communities Program. Now, the Senior Center and the Council on Aging is on board with this. They're currently undergoing a strategic planning process for this effort as well. Provide direct support for low-income homeowners and renters struggling with housing. So the town partners with Bread and Roses through our Affordable Housing Trust to provide down payment assistance to first-time homebuyers. GLCAC provides additional assistance, and the Housing Trust partners with Bread and Roses to construct affordable home ownership. So some examples of those exist on Waverly Road, on May Street, and currently they're looking at a project on Brown Court. Continue to work with the Community Preservation Committee annually to target funds to support affordable housing initiatives. This past year, the Affordable Housing Trust was granted $220,000 through CPC for affordable housing use. And for the past several years, they've been awarded $100,000 per year to go through affordable housing efforts. Consider providing financial assistance for home ownership opportunities. Again, this is where the Affordable Housing Trust has really come in with a great program for down payment assistance to first-time home buyers, and encourage the development of housing that is affordable to both low and moderate income households. And we think the inclusionary housing bylaw is going to help us achieve that. And from here, Andrew's going to talk about kind of going forward strategies for the future.
Thanks, Jean. And just to quickly sort of tee up the conversation we're about to have, I want you all to think about some of those strategies, because I think a lot of those strategies, we've made a lot of good progress on, but we want to continue to make progress on them. So we want people to think about, prioritizing whether or not we should keep these strategies in the next plan, carry them forward, continue to work on them, augment them. Things like passing an inclusionary zoning bylaw, all right, that's kind of a one and done, you check that off. But there's other things that we should continually do, like utilize CPA funding, for instance. I mean, we want your feedback to understand if that's something we should continue to do and prioritize. But with respect to some strategies that were in the last plan that we as a town didn't really fully execute or could do a little more work on, one is consider adopting an accessory dwelling unit bylaw. So yeah, we have started that process, but we're certainly not done. As mentioned, that's one of the topics tonight we'll talk about. We started the process of community engagement. The select board has bought into the idea of advancing this as a priority to look at. Our staff planner, Zach, is going to be talking about a survey that was issued earlier this year. We had really good feedback on. We'll talk about some of the responses to that survey and whether you all agree with what came out of that, and whether or not you all feel as though we should be pursuing and how we should pursue an ADU bylaw. Investigate ways to expand opportunities for village center and downtown zoning. So, obviously, we have our traditional downtown on Main Street. It extends all the way to High Street where we have the mill area. We do actually have a zoning overlay that accommodates multifamily housing. Earlier this year, we had a zoning consultant on board to discuss how we might want to rezone downtown, maybe introduce some new types of uses, maybe change some of the parking requirements for some of those uses. Do we want to extend some of the downtown overlay into the Sutton Street area? Because right now, if you drive off of 495 into North Andover along Sutton Street, it's an interest. It's a certain type of environment. Is it as welcoming as it could be to North Andover? Do we want to be able to accommodate some redevelopment down in that area? We have to think about that. And then in other areas of town, like for instance, out where Midtown Market is, you have kind of a destination over there. Should we be rezoning some of the area around it to accommodate sort of a village center type of environment? Should we think about other areas of town that could potentially accommodate that sort of style or neighborhood? Should we be doing a hub and spoke sort of system of neighborhoods throughout town? I think we should think about that a little more. So it's an option to think about. Consider revision to the family suites bylaw. This is kind of intrinsically linked to the discussion about ADUs. If we want to carry forward with an ADU bylaw, we would essentially be superseding the family suite bylaw, because the family suite the family suite regulations that we have in our bylaw, they essentially allow a homeowner to build an accessory dwelling unit, but that unit needs to be reserved for a family member. So an ADU bylaw would essentially allow a similar process, but it would open up the ability for that unit to be occupied by anybody, not just a family member. Investigate models that address creation of homes that are right-sized. This is a really interesting one. So what we mean by right-sized, so right now we have, you can build we have single-family home subdivisions with pretty large lot requirements. We've got multifamily units. Is there a way we can do an overlay somewhere in town? Are there appropriate locations we can think about, something that could accommodate more modest-sized homes? Homes that could accommodate either, for instance, a first-time home buyer. They're trying to enter the idea of owning a home, but they don't necessarily have enough money to put on a down payment on a larger home that's going to run them a lot in terms of a mortgage. And maybe they don't have a big family yet, and so they don't need all that room. And then likewise, for people that are getting a little older, they're empty nesters, they don't need the size home they live in anymore, and they want to downsize, but they don't necessarily want to downsize into a condominium or a townhome. They might want to be on a single floor in a ranch-style home, has 2 bedrooms, maybe 3 bedrooms, and it's on a small lot, and it's in a sort of compact neighborhood with some open space reserved. Are there areas of town that we can think about where we can implement that type of housing? Because again, this isn't only about housing production, it's also about diversifying the housing stock, okay? Because obviously, as one of the slides that Lauren went over, the one in regards to not having the type of housing units that match up with the housing types that we have, we just need to, I believe, we just need to make sure that we're lining up the different types of styles of housing units that we can provide with the demographic details that are coming out of the data. And then in terms of something that we didn't even conceive of in the last plan, we want to look at, achieving and maintaining compliance with the new MBTA communities mandate that came down from the state. So you'll learn more about that in the next couple minutes in this presentation. But certainly from the town's perspective, we want to comply with that, and we want to maintain compliance with it because A, we think it's good practice, but B, if we don't, we're going to find ourselves in a little bit of trouble with respect to some of the financial resources that are available to us currently because we are a housing choice community. So with that, I will pass it over to Elizabeth. Okay, great.
Thank you. But don't go far because there might be questions. So I'm Elizabeth Cooper. I work with Abby. Nice to be with you all and have this conversation. So we want to just get your reactions to those strategies that Andrew just mentioned that are sort of, still being chugged along and moved forward in the housing production plan. A few things. Want to hear if anyone's confused and has some clarifying questions. And then I want to look at, is there something missing that should be on this list as really high priority to be focusing on tackling in the next 5 years? Or what else do we need to be thinking about these strategies to make them successful? So first, just any clarifying questions so we all know we're talking about the same thing?
I'm wondering the consideration of the infrastructure of the town, schools in particular, and how will they be impacted with the additional number of people that would be moving in?
Thank you.
A couple things to say on that. Well, before I get to schools, I would just say, and Jean could actually go into a lot more detail on it because Jean works with all of the applicants that come before the planning board, but there is a pretty rigorous process by which, at least larger developments have to go through when they're proposing a project before the planning board. So they have to demonstrate that they're meeting stormwater standards. They're going to show what the traffic impact's going to be for their project. They have to demonstrate, basically, in many cases, especially with, for instance, the Royal Crest development that came up last year, there was an analysis of whether or not the sewer and water supply was going to be able to accommodate the new units and the new development that came in. So I think that's being examined on a constant basis. The town's done a lot of, I think, long-range planning over the last few years. We've done a lake watershed study update. We've done corridor studies, especially of Route 125. We did a town-wide analysis of the sewer system and water supply. So we're in pretty good shape. As far as schools, we actually did a town-wide analysis of the school system demographics as well. And really what it shows us is that I don't have it right in front of me to reference the exact numbers, but essentially the school enrollment has sort of leveled off, and in fact, it's actually over the past 10 years dipped a little bit. And that's even with all of the new homes that have been built over the last several years. And part of the reason for that is also demographic in nature. We see that we're an aging population, so there's more people living in town that their kids did go to school here at one point. They still live here. Their kids are not here in the school system anymore. People are having children later in their lives. They're getting married later in their lives. And when they do have kids, they might have smaller households. They may only have one child or two children, whereas in years past, we might have seen more families with 3 and 4 children in a household. So that's part of the reason. But also the town is dedicating a significant amount of funding to school facility upgrades. So Facilities Master Plan 2 was approved at the last town meeting. We're currently undergoing a process to add an addition of the middle school. I think most of the schools are actually being touched in the Facilities Master Plan over the next 10 to 15 years. So not only, I think, do the demographics show that we're in a pretty good situation with respect to the balance of housing and school children, but in the event that we need to plan for the future, I think we're making the necessary investments.
Great. Ryan.
So there's been a lot of mention about the number of housing units we need to increase. We've increased housing units 700 units in the last 5 years, somewhere around there, and the price keeps going up. So you guys must have a number that you know we have to get to for an additional amount of housing. Do you know what that number is to start having things become more affordable?
I'll just quickly start. I don't have the answer. No, in short, I don't have that number. But I also think something to keep in mind here is that housing doesn't stop at individual municipal borders. Okay, we live in a region. We live in the Merrimack Valley. We're lucky to have a regional planning agency that's looking at these things. So they're doing this exercise not only here, they're doing it in every community in the Merrimack Valley. There's regional planning agencies that are doing this in their respective regions, and the state's obviously looking at this pretty closely too. So I say all that just to say we can do all we want, but we need, obviously Lawrence is going to be building new units. Haverhill does. Some of the smaller communities like a Boxford really hasn't built, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but they haven't built any multifamily over the past 10 to 20 years. So I think what the state's trying to do is say this is going to be an all-in approach from all communities. So it's not only about what our individual number is going to be, it's about what is the state doing, what are individual regions doing. Ian or Lauren, do you guys want to add anything to that, or do you have anything to say in relation to any of that?
As Andrew said, Ian again, there is no magic number. The problem being that we have such a lack of supply right now, and that's what caused such skyrocketing prices. What we're looking for is seeing if there can be some sort of leveling off in the macro term. Think of the macroeconomics that we have set up here. And we base that off of what we look at some national studies of regional markets. And when we see that increase in housing production, you start to see prices level off. We know we're not next year going to see prices decrease by $100 a month in rentals. That's just not going to be happening. But what we want to see is that leveling off and that catch up of when Lauren had the incomes versus rent up here earlier, the bar graph she had. We want to see that those bar graphs getting closer to each other of incomes keeping pace with rent. And that doesn't happen when we have such a lack of supply. And we know that as the years go on, we need more units along with that, so it's trying to catch up. And we don't have a magic number because once we reach that magic number, nothing is all solved. But thinking about the national studies and what we look at and seeing the markets, mostly we just need more units.
Sadly, only hard, complicated answers.
I wish.
One of the things that concerns me is the point that you brought up, Brian. Do we have, how much land do we have left to build on? I mean, how much really is available? I mean, we as a community pride ourselves on open space, which runs exactly counter to having available land to build on. So we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. The other thing that really concerns me a lot is that we've gone from 8.8 to 7.9%. We're getting further away from being able to control our destiny when it comes to 40B activities. So that's scary to me as a community. Now, so what we could possibly be looking at is a whole bunch of 40B activity, which we may or may not want. I don't know. It's just that those seem to be the overriding issues to me is how much space do we have to build stuff on, and what can we really do to move the affordable housing number? How do we really do that?
Stan, if I could If I could turn it on you, which strategies do you think are most important to get us there, and what else do we need to be thinking about besides this to deal with those very valid concerns you're raising about land availability, but also about, sort of how are we doing relative to our affordability goals?
Well, I was just going to say, I heard, I think it was Lauren earlier was saying that there's been some communities that have done build-out analyses. I don't know if that's something we should be looking at doing. We can certainly entertain that as a planned strategy if we want to get better information and an understanding of how much space, how much land do we have in town that is quote unquote developable, so to speak. One response I have to that right off the bat without having that data is just to say, I think there's land out there. I don't know that it's always land that everybody wants to see redeveloped. That's the question. How much land is out there that could be redeveloped that people could say, yeah, it's an appropriate place to see development for housing, for instance. And then to your issue about the dropping of the SHI from 8.8 to 7.8, a big reason my take on why that's been happening is because we have built a lot of multifamily housing over the past few years, but it's all been market rate. We didn't have, up until a year and a half ago, we didn't have an inclusionary zoning bylaw, for instance, which now would, so if we had built all of those Avalon apartments and Minco and other developments that have come down the pike over the past few years, and they had been required to build 15% of those units as affordable, I don't know that we'd be over our 10%, but we certainly wouldn't have dropped as precipitously as we did. So now going forward, you're right. It could be a 40B that comes along that helps boost us up over one of those above the 10% threshold, or it could be a combination of that and/or another development being built with 15% of those units being affordable.
Well, I wanted to answer. The answer to your question is I don't think any of those things address the questions that I have because, like ADU, that would be like a drop in the bucket. I mean, yeah, sure, that would be good. And, in the larger context, people could have a little bit more flexibility to do things. But I don't see that making a serious impact on, affordable housing or whatever goals we're trying to achieve. And that's, it does sort of help with the question of space because that's on existing property. So that would help a little bit.
We welcome you all to think big. So tell us what else we should be considering here. If these, probably got to be a multi,
Well, to Andrew's point, doing an inventory of what we have available, yes. I think that would be critical for me because if we don't have that, it's just all theoretical. And we can talk and talk, but we don't know what's available. So,
let's go to Tom.
Why does it have to be a drop in the bucket? I look at that ADU. What I read in the paper this week, wasn't in 65% of the respondents were they pro ADU? Is that what I read in the paper? And if you do ADUs, then you don't need more land. And they're moving out of the big house, so that puts that house on the market so the young family can move in. So it doesn't solve your school problem because the young family moves into their house, but you don't need more land. And I don't know why. I'm in real estate. I know how many people look for in-laws. There's a lot. I really don't think it's a drop in the bucket. And when you have so much pressure on housing costs, I think a lot of these families would love to share space, be it with the young kids coming out of college or the parents, needing to move into the house, whichever way it goes. I think there's a big need, and I think it would be a lot more than a drop in the bucket.
The only thing over time, you're right. I would say, I guess the difference between ADUs and say several hundred unit development is you get a big increase with one project. ADUs are each by each, right? It's every person having to go to figure it out and decide what they want to do and go to the planning or zoning, but so it just takes time. That's all.
Yeah. Great point. I'm going to go to Peter in just one second, but I'm mindful of time and there's a couple other meaty topics we want to get into. So as we continue discussing, I'm going to ask everybody to think about this exercise. So we've got written down these 5 strategies here, and again, not that we can't add others to the list, but everybody is going to get 3 dots. It's an honor system, so we just have to trust you that you're only going to take 3. And we'd like you to put the dots on the strategies that you think are most important to be advancing here. And again, and I'm happy to put up some other ones that we're thinking through now. But we want to get a sense from you all which ones you think are the most important to really move the needle, advance progress, help North Andover get where it needs to get. So you can do that as we're talking. And sorry, folks in the middle, we'll just have to ask you to go to one side or the other. Well, we've got 3 tables, so yes, exactly. Okay, so Peter, please tell us what's missing or what else do we need to be thinking about for these strategies?
Yeah, thank you. As part of this preparation for becoming a member of the board for the HHT, I watched a couple of videos about housing workshops which were done by the Massachusetts State Agency, Housing Agency, all about affordable housing. There were a couple of nonprofit developers who pretty much clearly and consistently pointed out what their major obstacles were for building affordable housing or housing in general. The first one was land, and here specifically zoning, but also the cost of land. Okay, so specifically for the nonprofits, it was necessary for them essentially to get the land for free from the town in order to build something over there. The second was essentially abutters, so any kind of legal challenges by abutters, and this spoke mostly to the location, so the type of land actually which was identified for development and which did not have too many abutters which would be negatively impacted. And the third one, the cost actually of the land and in general of the development I already mentioned, and one of the driving factors was there the federal support actually affordable housing. And this federal support requires essentially to have a development of at least 40 units. So we are not talking about smaller units which can be done efficiently, at least by nonprofit developers. It has to be something of a mid-size or larger size. So what I'd be suggesting essentially, look at these aspects when looking at the zoning, obviously the location itself, location selection for these zoning and zoning overlays, and then consider whether the town in isolated cases is willing to donate town land actually at least to nonprofit developers in order to kick off these kind of developments.
Thank you. Let me hand it to Jean to help us.
Yeah, I just want to make one clarifying comment to Tom's point about a lot of people want an in-law. So tonight we mentioned that we already have what's called a family suite bylaw, which allows for homeowners to construct another living unit, either attached or in the existing primary. It has to be, whether rented or not, but it has to be a certain relative that can live in that unit, and it's only permitted as long as that certain relative is living there. Once it's going to be a different relative, technically they have to come back to the zoning board and get that approved. What the ADU bylaw offers is not only could it be a relative, but it also could be a rental unit, another source of income for that primary homeowner. And when we talk about affordable housing, we often talk about capital A versus small a. And what we think accessory dwelling units offer is that small a. So the capital A actually is a unit that goes on the list that contributes to that 10% requirement, where a small a is just, it becomes a little bit more affordable to people because they typically rent for less than, one of these apartments at Avalon or Minco. It's a homeowner subsidizing their income and can rent to anybody. So.
All right. Peter, I'm just going to move us on because we've got some other topics we got to get to. So I would love you all to each take 3 dots. Again, place them on the strategies that you think are most important to advance. And meanwhile, we're going to move to the next phase, which is having a more in-depth conversation about ADUs.
Well, we're going MBTA.
Oh, sorry. MBTA communities first.
Sorry, are these both the same?
They are the same. Yes, sorry. So just pick one or the other. Is this you? Yeah. And we're a little short on time.
Yes, that's okay.
All right. Hi, folks. I know we're all taking a minute here to put our dots on those boards over there, so I'll give you guys a couple more seconds to do that. But while we're working on that, I will start introducing our next topic, which is MBTA communities. I know this has been kind of a hot topic across our region, so definitely looking forward to getting into this discussion. All right, looks like we're almost wrapped up here. Thank you all for participating in that little breakout activity over here. Oh, give you guys an opportunity to. All right, so just to get started with the MBTA communities discussion, we can talk a little bit about some of the history of the legislation, and then we'll dive into some North Andover specifics. Thanks. So just to get into a little bit of the history of this legislation, so the Massachusetts legislature passed this law back in 2021, and this law applies to every city and town in Massachusetts that either has an MBTA transit stop, or if they are adjacent to a community that has one. So this applies to about 180 communities in the Commonwealth here, and it also applies to all of the communities that are in our region. We've been working with the town of North Andover very closely to help North Andover get to a point where we can get you to compliance. And the goal eventually is to address this housing shortage that we've all heard a lot about tonight. Now, the big thing here is that this law requires the creation of a zoning district that allows multifamily housing by right. It is not a production mandate. So the state is essentially saying you have to zone for X amount of units and show that you can be in compliance with it. But it's not necessarily requiring that you have to produce that many units. So a little bit of a distinction there. So specifically, what does the zoning look like? So in order to comply with the statute, the zone has to, again, allow multifamily housing by right with no age restrictions. The minimum density of these districts has to be at least 15 units an acre. And then for some communities, it also has to be within a certain, within a half mile of their transit station. North Andover is designated as an adjacent community, so you don't necessarily have to zone around a specific area. So what does this look like for North Andover? So your district must be a minimum of 50 acres, and again, allow for that density of 15 units an acre. It must have a capacity for multifamily units that's equal to about 10% of your housing stock, and again, has to have reasonable access for transit. So a little bit about the timeline here. Like I mentioned, we've been working with the town for the last several months. The town is in what we call interim compliance. So they've submitted their action plan. They've told the state that they are working on it. And they've been working with us very closely to get to a point where we can present a plan to you all here to show some compliance options. We've also been working pretty closely with the select board and the planning board. They've reviewed this. They've had a lot of feedback, and we've incorporated a lot of that into the plan that we're showing you today. So just to give a little bit of the background of the timeline here, but the ultimate goal is to eventually get this to your town meeting. So this is an article that will be voted on because this is a zoning change. So the target here is for getting it to Maytown meeting for this upcoming spring. All right, so looking at why we need to comply here. Massachusetts has come out with some regulations with this that say if you do not comply with this legislation, the communities that don't will be ineligible to receive certain state grants. They've also come out and said that there will be some additional grants that won't necessarily be ineligible for, but those communities that do comply with this regulation will kind of have priority over communities that do not. The state attorney general has also said very clearly that this is the law and communities are required to comply with this. So of course, our goal here essentially is to get to North Andover to a point where you have a really solid plan for compliance in the eyes of the state here.
Okay, before you want, the acronyms, can you tell us what those mean? HED and...
Yes, so this changed a little bit. It's the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. So it's just the
Economic Development, which is the ED.
yeah, DHCD. Yeah, it changed a little bit, but yeah, DHCD is the Department of Housing and Community Development. Yes, so it just changed designation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to go over, as I mentioned up here, the town will be ineligible to receive certain grants from the state. In the past 7 years, North Andover has accessed over $6.38 million in funding. So if the town does not reach compliance, then you would be at risk to not receive any of that kind of further funding as well. So just to go over, this is our first district that we're going to be looking at. So of course, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Market Basket Plaza right on 114. We looked at this because it had reasonable access for transportation options, right off of 495 with access to getting to Lawrence and getting to that commuter rail station. It's a 33-acre district, and it, of course, is also serviced by the MEVA bus route. So this is, again, that kind of transit-oriented development that we're looking at here. And we also see this as a gateway improvement opportunity for the town. This is the first thing a lot of folks see when they come into the town. On a personal note, I went to Merrimack College, and every time I went to class, I had to drive by this on my way to school. So definitely a really great opportunity for the town to have a little bit of that improved gateway. It also does align with the master plan strategies as well. There are lots of reasons why we've looked at these districts specifically. We've also considered other areas of town, but this is one of the areas that we landed on that we felt was most compelling for a potential district. If you want to go to the next one, we're going to talk about the... Oh no. Might need a second, but I guess while we have a little pause here, does anybody have any feedback specifically on either the regulations I talked about or the district itself? Sure.
I want to mention the second district before we, so they just know there's two.
Yeah, there is a second district we will go over. I'll just give them a minute. Tell them what it is. Oh, so the second district that we're going to be looking at is located at the Osgood Landing property. Not the back portion of it where that new Amazon facility is, but it's going to be in that kind of front portion of it. You'll get to see the map in a second, but just to give you a little preview of what we're going to be looking at. Yeah.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is actually the zoning means there can be multi-unit building, but there does not have to be, right? Maybe as a clarification, because it otherwise immediately sounds like, okay, Market Basket is going away and suddenly hundreds of units actually going up there, right?
Sure. So definitely something to note is this is going to be an overlay district. So basically the underlying zoning could still apply there. So of course where Market Basket stands right now, if a developer were to come in and they want to do something with that property, they could of course keep the parameters of the underlying zoning. The way we look at this is it's giving communities more options, right? If a developer wants to come in and they wanted to build some sort of multifamily housing component, with the way that these areas are zoned currently, there's not that opportunity, or at least in the Market Basket case. So they still do have the option. They don't have to build housing, but it gives them the option to, essentially. Sure.
So I understand why they're doing this. I think it's a good thing. But my question is, I imagine there's got to be somebody out there that's going to sue the state for the threat of holding back money on this. It seems pretty draconian to do that. Has there been a lawsuit at all, or has there been any talk of it or anything like that would be coming down the pike?
So from what I understand currently, so the way it works with the kind of, I guess, threat of litigation, the Attorney General has said that this could potentially open up individual communities to civil litigation from the state specifically, but it could also open up opportunities for other entities outside of the state to potentially sue over that. A lot of this is still, again, very new. This is new legislation, so we're going to kind of see if that plays out in the courts, if that comes up a lot more. But in that sense, that's something that could be a potential threat, I guess. And then in the case of the grant money, the way that we look at this as well, you know, obviously we all pay taxes here, and when a town is not in compliance, if you're losing out on that opportunity for grant money, it's almost like you're losing out on getting some of that tax money back in a way. So that's why we're really encouraging towns to, you know, of course, look at these districts and, you know, reach compliance, because that way you won't be having that threat from the state. Any other questions about kind of the regulations and the background of it, or the Market Basket District specifically?
We're going. We're
yeah. No worries. Well, I'm sure, I think if folks are mostly kind of familiar with the Osgood Landing site in general, we can kind of discuss that a little bit. I don't have the map on the screen here, but that district was chosen as well for some of its transit opportunities. I believe there was a new MEVA station that was just approved, or stop that was approved for that area. It's also looked at again as kind of a gateway improvement coming into town. And currently it has, there's a 40R district there that does allow multifamily by right. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, so yeah, as you guys can see here, and this is not the most updated screenshot, but the Amazon facility is currently in the back of that parcel over there. We are right now talking about this first section right along the street there. Right.
Is that where the solar panels are?
I believe, maybe correct me, I think they're kind of further to the right here. Are they?
They're in that far right area, but the area in front right there is the office building, the legacy office building.
Yeah.
So it's the entire area. It's both the area that's comprised of the solar panels, but also the commercial building.
Yeah, so again, this is a 58-acre parcel over here, right along 125. And it also has, again, some of that close transportation access to 495 as well. We also see this, again, as an opportunity for you to improve the gateway into town. And we felt like it really did align with a lot of those master plan strategies. So curious folks' thoughts on this area as well, or, you know, kind of taking both of them as a whole, how we feel about these potential district options.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. Sure.
Weren't they trying to
If
get a
that
train?
checks off the box, do
Can
that.
we give Tom the mic, just
Oh,
so
yeah.
the people online can hear? Yeah.
What-
Thank you.
Wasn't the owner trying to get a train stop there at one point? What happened to that? Okay.
I don't know too much about past history, but I believe there had been talk about, you know, an MBTA stop, commuter rail stop there at some point. It is in our master plan to examine the feasibility of siting a rail stop there, and as a matter of fact, we got a state earmark to do that. So we're currently, we have basically a solicitation out to a couple different engineering firms that could help us with that project. So we hoped in the next couple months to get started on a project where we do in fact look at the feasibility of doing it. A feasibility analysis is like a one step forward in a multi-step process. Everybody can imagine the bureaucracy of the MBTA and everything else that would have to go into a decision like that. But we're trying to just figure out, is this even something we should be pursuing down the line in a more concentrated fashion? But yes, that would be something we're going to be investigating at some point. Well, yeah, if you go, you know, toward Haverhill and the Ward Hill connector over there, it is very close to 495. Absolutely.
I'm sorry, if you get an MBTA stop there, actually, wouldn't we increase the requirement under the MBTA law?
We would have to investigate that. I'll, you know, I'll leave it to our experts on the housing law. I mean, right now, we are considered a rail-adjacent community because we don't have a stop in town. If that were to change, the state would have to say, okay, now you're something different. They'd have to actually take that action. I don't know if there's anything that you would add to that, Ian.
No, they haven't said anything.
Yeah, and I mean, this would be a very deliberate process. I mean, we're talking like years for anything so I don't think we're gonna have to worry about that anytime soon, but that could definitely factor into any decision making on getting a stop there.
Let's just stand, and then I'm curious about this side of the room. What are you thinking?
I just had a question about doing a study on a rail stop. Why not have it where the old train station was, or why not have it downtown? Why there? I mean,
good question. We did actually leave some optionality in the solicitation that we put out to say, we're thinking Osgood Landing, but if there are other spots in town we should be looking at, we want that input. And in the master plan, it does reference Osgood Landing specifically. That's why we've been sort of thinking about it there, but it's not to say it couldn't be anywhere else.
based on a 40R that was now
Yep.
long defunct.
Actually, the 40R is not technically defunct.
Well, but I mean,
So, folks,
But yes, I want to.
this too, but I want to talk about MBTA communities as well as the train station.
Yes.
I was wondering, why does it have to be just one train station? They could have one downtown, I came from a town in Long Island. We had 3 stops in a 5-mile-long town.
Cost, time, bureaucracy. I'm not saying it couldn't happen at some point in the future, but I'm just saying, it would take I will say it'll take a multi-year and millions of dollars, maybe more than that, effort to bring this one station there to fruition if it were to happen, if it were to be feasible. But I'll take your point. I mean, yes, there are plenty of communities that have multiple stations. In fact, Haverhill is, Andover has multiple stations, yeah.
58 acres, this feels like if this goes before town meeting, that's the choice if you don't want to create housing in North Andover. It's 58 acres. If we use 20 units an acre, that's almost 1,200 units, probably gets the town right to where they need to be. I can't imagine a developer building high-end multifamily housing next to a 3 million square foot Amazon facility with trucks coming in and out all day long. Like, to me, this is not where we should be putting multifamily housing. I think there's so much more potential for industrial commercial synergy with Amazon that we should be putting that there, put the housing somewhere else.
Can I just respond to that? So point well taken, and I don't personally disagree with you in general. I think a couple things in response to that, though. And I'm the economic development guy, so I want nothing more than to see this site well utilized for additional job creation, a synergistic approach to being there on the same site as Amazon. Would a developer build there? I don't know. It's a good question. It had, in the long run, been envisioned as a site for housing because it does have a 40R district attached to it. I understand it was there before Amazon went in. But people are building a lot of housing in a lot of places. I mean, I've seen housing built right on Route 1 in Saugus. I've seen housing built in all kinds of locations. So I think it might be a certain type of market that would be that would have to be thought about that might accommodate that area right there, and it would have to be done in a sensitive way to be compatible with that certain site. The other issue there too is the density. I don't know if there's enough density for a developer to do enough housing units there. It's a lot of housing units, but at a lower minimum density for by right. If you want to get more density, you'd probably have to go special permit, and I don't know if a lot of developers would want to do that. So it's something to think about. I appreciate the thought. We did also look at other areas of town. We investigated whether there were a grouping of parcels around the downtown that could be more appropriate to do that. I think there's interest from the planning board on taking another approach to the downtown. But this is kind of what we're going with right now, this in combination with the Market Basket Plaza. Anybody else on MBTA communities or any feedback?
We have time for about 2 more questions or comments.
Anybody we haven't heard from have reactions about these sites or thoughts about other considerations that should drive selection of a site?
I guess I just want to come back to what's the goal? What is North Andover's goal of leveraging MBTA communities? Is it to just comply and build more housing, or is it to build housing in places that can support, I think, the overall goals of the master plan? To me, putting more housing in relation to downtown, although I recognize it would be at a lower density, makes a lot more sense to build the type of downtown that was envisioned with the master plan and the downtown work that's been going on. Like building that built-in customer base and having more people within walking distance to the downtown. These two locations are so far flung that I think they should be included because it'll get us to where we need to be. But I think including more strategic locations for putting housing, I think in places that support the goals of the town would be better.
When you were speaking, did you say that all you need to do to comply is to rezone but not actually build anything?
Yes.
So as long as we have this all on paper, we never have to build anything there. That's what you're saying.
From the state's perspective,
Right.
you would be in compliance as
Okay.
long as you zone.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, I think it's still the town's intention to want to see more housing built around the downtown. I mean, we look at the Sutton Street area, for instance, and we're like, huge missed opportunity down in that area where we can, beautify the gateway opportunity coming in to town and to the downtown and provide more of a year-round tax base and customer base for the downtown retail and commercial buildings there. I think we're balancing, so there's a lot of communities out there where in order to comply, you have to go to city council and you get it passed, or you get it passed with whatever it is, a majority vote at city council. Here we essentially have a one-shot deal at town meeting. So we have to make a calculated, we have to take a calculated approach and decide what's going to work for us in order to get this into compliance. And sometimes you don't get the perfect plan product, I would say, at town meeting. We want to get something that a broad swath of the community, or at least town meeting voters, can be on board with. That's kind of some of the thinking here.
Is this an either or both of those? Both.
We need both to be in compliance.
Okay. Anything from the missing middle, if you will? I thought about that a few minutes ago. Any comments on the MBTA communities plan or the questions? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Kayla. That was great. We're going to move now to our last section, our last topic on ADUs, and I'm going to pass to Zach.
Hi, everyone. If you haven't met me before, I'm Zach. I'm the town planner for the town of North Andover. Pretty new here, so still learning along as you guys are. So here to talk about accessory dwelling units. I'm sure you've heard some about it recently. Just for basics, an ADU by definition is an additional residential building that occupies the same lot as a primary residence. And as you can see in this image, it can be attached to the primary residence or it can be detached as a separate structure. But that is just the general idea of what an ADU looks like and different examples of what they can look like. Sorry. And as you might have seen, we issued a survey a couple months ago just to solicit feedback on accessory dwelling units because, as we previously mentioned, one of the goals of the select board was to explore, or to gain public feedback about accessory dwelling units. So we ran the survey for about 2 weeks. We received 233 responses from the town. And if you want to look at more results of the survey, because I won't go over every single data point here. Yeah. But as I was saying, if you want to look at more of the data points, there is a new page on the town website called Accessory Dwelling Units, and it goes into more information that I'll get into tonight, as well as there's a link to view the full results of the survey. So if you're curious about seeing everything else that's going on and seeing more visual data, it's on there for you to access. And just wanted to highlight a couple of the data points. Like I said, there are lots of graphs and things like that online. I won't get into every single one of them, but just to go over a couple of them. So for the first point, we're really looking at, we kind of presented potential benefits of implementing a bylaw for ADUs. And in this example, 70% of the respondents agreed or somewhat agree with the statement that accessory dwelling units can be an effective way to increase the number of available housing units, but not at the expense of open land. So that kind of goes back to our earlier conversations about utilizing space that's already existing, and ADUs can be a way to, speak to that point. And then another benefit that was presented was increasing affordable housing supply, and 61% of people that responded to the survey agreed or somewhat agree with that statement. And then kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, how there are two different types of accessory dwelling units, both attached and detached. The statement was that should ADUs only exist if they are attached to the primary structure, so that usually looks like conversion of an existing space, whether it's an attic unit or an extension of the main house, and 65% of people disagreed or somewhat disagreed with the statement. So that kind of gets to the point of, should ADUs be attached only, or should they be allowed to be a detached structure on the existing property? And then the last point I wanted to highlight was that the owner occupancy issue. So kind of what we brought up earlier as well about the current family suite guidelines. In those guidelines, in the zoning bylaw, the owner of the property is only allowed to live in the primary residence. So this question was really gauging feedback about how, if the property owner should be able to choose if they would like to live in the primary unit or the accessory unit. And to that point, 70% agreed or somewhat agreed that the property owner should have some autonomy and be able to choose if they would like to live in either the primary unit or the accessory unit. And then in the next section, we kind of just presented some potential guidelines. These are standard with any zoning bylaw. And we just wanted to get feedback on what people maybe had ideas for or how they were feeling about certain standards. And so for the first one, we polled people about size limitations. So we kind of used 900 square feet as a benchmark, and the options were the maximum size for an accessory dwelling unit should be 900 square feet, it should be less than 900 square feet, or none of the above. And in this case, the most popular answer was none of the above, which kind of indicates that there's still more work to be done on what people feel comfortable with, what people prefer in terms of size limitations. And then the next question was about the number of bedrooms that should be able to be permitted should a hypothetical bylaw come into play for accessory dwelling units. And the most popular answer was that there should be a maximum of 2 bedrooms per accessory dwelling unit. And then the last question was about accommodation for parking, and the most popular answer for that question was that ADUs should accommodate for 1 parking space per accessory dwelling unit. And then the next piece I wanted to get into is just some of the things that are going on at the state level. So as I had mentioned earlier, the survey ran between October 2nd and October 17th, and then purely coincidentally, the next day, the Affordable Homes Act, or this proposed housing bill, came out. And as part of the housing bill, there would be a provision which would mandate communities to permit ADUs. And this doesn't mean that tomorrow that every community has to permit ADUs in their community. There's still a long legislative process that's occurring. There's no guarantee that it gets passed in the first place at all, and if it does, it could look completely different than it does right now. But even if it does pass, there's definitely going to be help from the state, and what it looks like now, what might not be what it looks like down the road. But you can find the full text. Like I said, there is a new page on the town website about accessory dwelling units, and part of that, it does list some of the potential, like it does list the full language of the proposed housing bill, but nothing set in stone right now. That's just wanted to draw light to what's going on at the state level. Yeah.
So we're interested to just get can we go to the next? Oh, there isn't one? All right. Well, we're just interested in your reactions to some of the questions that were asked in the survey as well. If there are other considerations you think should go into the development of an ADU bylaw, if that's something that the town pursues, and if there are requirements that should be attached around some of those issues raised. I'm going to go to Ryan, and I'll see if there's anybody we haven't heard from, and then I'll go to Peter.
I'm going to apologize. I have a lot of opinions about this, so this might take a minute. First off, I think the survey was a great idea. Appreciate it. I filled it out. I do have to admit, I felt as though it was very biased in one direction. There wasn't a way to kind of put your negative spin on it, in my opinion, or be against it. But I think it was a good idea. Just could have been a little bit different the way it was done. So ADUs is a very misleading term, in my opinion. And It's essentially what this bylaw is doing is essentially creating two families, in my opinion. So as somebody who's in the real estate world, like Tom, and also probably one of the biggest landlords in this area, I am very for apartments and two families and everything like that in the right place. So these ADUs, they're creating two families. I think the name is very misleading. But I like the way the family suite law is now. I think it works well. You go to the town, you go to the zoning board, you present your plan, you have abutters that are aware of it, they can come speak against or for it. And the biggest thing is there's a provision in there that only your family can live in there. My biggest issue with these is that they can be rented out by anybody. And as a landlord, I know how to screen my tenants, and I do a pretty good job of it, but I have to say 1 out of 25, I screw up, and I get the wrong tenant. And that tenant's a pain in the butt. They leave cars outside, they leave trash outside, they party till 2 in the morning, they have dogs that bark all day even though they're not allowed to have a dog. And you're putting that into potentially a single family neighborhood. That's a major issue in my opinion. Now, if you did a family suite with somebody that is related to the owner, phenomenal. I personally think in-laws is a phenomenal idea. I think we should push that idea more. But the idea of two families is in a single family neighborhood I'm not okay with it. There was something brought up during the select board meetings that these would not bring down the value of houses if they said it would bring up. I would disagree with that. Me personally, I live in a phenomenal neighborhood. I love my neighborhood where I live. I live in a single family house. I'm surrounded by multifamilies. You take my house, you put it in a single family neighborhood, and the value of my house goes up $200,000 easily all day long. So the argument that this is going to bring property values up is incorrect. But I think this bylaw is something that we should talk strongly about, but keep it mostly for people that are related to the family. So thank you for taking the time to get that all out.
Thank you. I said I want to see if there's anybody we haven't heard from, and then I'll go to Peter. Is there anybody that we want to hear from? All of you, those of you who've been quiet. Any feedback on ADUs? All right, you're at risk of being voluntold.
Thank you. ADUs are perfect Airbnb properties. Okay, so my biggest concern in this context was, North Andover is not, let's say, a very desirable vacation spot at this point in time, okay, but it's close enough actually to Boston and to other attractive spots here, North Shore and so on. So Airbnb could be an issue. Do we want to consider in the bylaw to address that?
Yes, that is definitely a valid concern. We got a lot of feedback about short-term rentals in the survey, and something that's part of that I should have mentioned. That's part of the proposed in the housing bill is that municipalities would allow restrict short-term rentals. So in that case, the town would have discretion to prohibit Airbnbs. So just wanted to clarify.
Thank you. Great point, Stan.
I just had 2 questions, Ryan. You can rent a single-family house, right?
Absolutely.
So I can have barking dogs and parties at 2 o'clock in a single-family house next door to me, right?
Yeah, but the rental amount's going to be...
Yeah. I understand. But if I get 10 college kids that finesse their way into the house, right? I could still have issues, right?
with anything, you could have a bad owner.
Yeah.
But the odds are a lot less.
And with the family, whatever it is, what you said was only the owner can live in the primary house. Is that what you said?
Yes. Yeah, but
So,
not the accessory dwelling.
right. So if I wanted to let my kids live in my house and I wanted to live in the family unit or what, I can't do that.
No, you can.
No, he just said I couldn't. Only the owner can live in. The owner has to live in the primary house.
That's my understanding. Yes.
Under the existing bylaw.
Well, if this is a test of what Ryan thinks.
I just.
No, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. So,
What he said was only the owner can live in the primary house. So I couldn't switch.
so a lot of the time, in the current situation it's in right now, the owner, the elderly person, will sell the house to the son or daughter.
Oh, okay.
And then they'll move into the
Okay, yeah. So you're both right. Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
95% of the time.
I see.
Yeah.
Brian, if they were not rentable,
can I give
would
you
you be okay, if the ADUs were not rentable, would you be okay with ADUs? So your concern is the rentability of it, turning it into a two-family?
And that has to still go through zoning. I think it should still have to go through zoning like it does now.
Of course.
So it should stay the way it is right now, is my opinion. There's nothing wrong with the way it is.
What you mean with the family suite law?
And Zach, could you comment on it would still have to go through a zoning process and review, even if it was an accessory dwelling unit?
The way that the potential state mandate is written is that in certain single-family zoning districts, it would be by right development. So no, there would be no permitting through the zoning. But once again, none of these parameters are set in stone, subject to change. This is very new, so none of this is guaranteed to be what it looks like if it does pass in the first place.
And if, in absence of the state law, does North Andover have a thought about how it would be regulated and sort of what kind of review would be required for ADUs?
That's just something that we're kind of just sitting back. We're not, pushing forward any bylaw at the current moment. Right now we're really just soliciting feedback. We're exploring what people's like. Right now we're just getting people's thoughts about potential guidelines and that sort of thing. But like I said, nothing is set in place.
Yeah. Sure. I don't want to cut somebody else off.
Anybody we haven't heard from want to chime in?
Yeah, before I say something else.
No.
I just forgot one point, and Jay and Ben will probably remember this. So around 07, 08, the R4 zoning and district, by right, allowed a single-family house to become a two-family, and developers all around town were doing that. They were buying single-family houses and putting another unit on. The town went bananas. They went berserk, and they were very upset. And as a result, we now have a new zoning bylaw for the R4 district that you have to get a special permit to add another unit. So this is going against what the town has already created because the town was so upset by it.
Jean, are you trying to respond? I saw you.
Come on up.
So I agree with that. The timing, I think, was a little earlier, more like 2003-04, but there was no criteria at the time. So they were adding that second unit, and it was equal in size to the first. You wouldn't know which was the primary or accessory. They didn't necessarily have to have separate entrances. They didn't have to look exactly like the primary. So the criteria went in the family suite that now, helps to make it more of an accessory unit than another primary unit. But I agree, the library areas did. They were upset, and the bylaw went in so that review goes through the zoning board of appeals.
Which works well.
We're getting close to wrap up. I just want to hear if there's any last comments on ADUs before we just kind of let you know where we're going, please.
I really like the idea of separate as well. I think they should be both. If you were thinking about allowing detached, would there be any analysis of which lots in town might be most appropriate, or sort of how you might set the setbacks and the footprint relative to the lot size?
I can't speak to the exact parameters that would be part of that, but as part of the state mandate, there would be, the ADU would be subject to additional, review, like site plan review, Title V, setback heights, and that sort of thing. I can't speak to exactly what the ideal lot would be, but yeah.
Just to confirm, you meant the ADU would be separate from the primary. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Sorry. It's good protocol. Yeah, thanks.
I guess my question was, if the town were to consider, or the staff were to work on a bylaw for ADUs that would allow attached or detached, would you do an analysis of parcels to understand how big a detached ADU either could or should be relative to the size of, say, the average lot size in a particular district or part of town?
Sounds like that's an interesting idea to consider, that kind of analysis.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a great idea to consider. I think we're just not there yet as far as knowing whether or not, what the next step would be. I think right now we're just trying to take a very high level general temperature of people in town if this is something they'd get on board with. And what complicates it a little bit is the state proposal coming from the governor. So does that cool our heels a little bit? Are people going to feel like, well, let's see if the state mandates it before we do anything? Or do we want to jump in with our own bylaw that we potentially have to then alter in order to comply with any state mandate that gets passed in the long run? So I think it's all good stuff to consider. It's stuff that we should be, I think, noting in our plan, that's something we should take into consideration if we're going to continue an analysis of the potential to adopt an ADU bylaw in the near future or the long term, and also take into consider things that Ryan was bringing up as well as do we want to, or are we satisfied with the family suite idea that we currently have and shouldn't really move forward on opening it up further? All good things to consider. So,
any last thoughts? Okay. Well, thank you all. This feedback is so helpful, and you all turning out on a night in cold, dark December to share feedback at this point of the plan is really valuable and appreciated. And Lauren's going to say a few things about where this feedback is going and what next opportunities you have in the process.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you all for such thoughtful questions and comments and concerns. It really helps us shape not only the housing production plan, but I think just furthers these housing conversations in a really comprehensive manner. So really appreciate that. I just wanted to summarize some key points we heard from each of these 3 topics, starting with the overall HUP strategies. I think one of the main concerns we were hearing from you all is how much land do we truly have left to build on? And what that triggers for me is, the need to kind of explore more infill opportunities. I'm hearing both sides of, we understand the need for increased housing and housing typology to accommodate our residents, whether starter homes or downsizing, et cetera. But where are we going to put it? So I think that's something that we can dive a little bit deeper into more detail about what some of those strategies could look like in the housing production plan, but definitely keeping that front of mind. Going forward to MBTA communities, I heard a lot of, I think that's a great idea. So I'm curious about that. And I know that this is, I know you had a public workshop on MBTA a couple of months back. This is the second time this has been brought to the public. There will be more opportunities, leading up to town meeting to kind of dive into this, especially as we start to narrow down and move forward with those specific districts. But I really, appreciated just the willingness to hear about it. And it seems like this group was very informed already, which is a great idea. I'm not lost on the idea of what is North Andover's goal of leveraging MBTA communities. Is there opportunity to be looking for more developer-friendly, housing production-centric lots in areas throughout town? So while I'm hearing that I think it's a great idea for the Osgood Landing and Market Basket sites, maybe there's some opportunity to explore some downtown areas, talking about what the feasibility for passing this is at town meeting. So there's a lot more discussion to be had. And for ADUs, what I'm hearing is there is an interest in them, right? I think that we kind of heard a split opinion on whether or not to keep the existing family suites bylaw or make changes for an ADU bylaw. But there is a desire for those ADUs regardless to go through the Zoning Board of Appeals, I think, kind of whatever we come out with. I know that from the state's perspective, and this is just my own thoughts, I'm curious if the state, if they do push through with the ADU kind of mandate throughout the state, if they'll take an MBTA communities approach where they allow, here is what's actually required. You need to have an ADU bylaw, but what can each town do to make sure that it fits, within their own regulations and concerns. So I think there still might be opportunity for that to be able to be, go through the ZBA. But curious, again, as Zach was saying, first of many conversations. Appreciate everyone, again, coming out this evening. Hope that we see you at other public engagement sessions, especially around MBTA communities, just because it's our hottest button issue right now. But in terms of the HGP, we'll be taking this feedback back, going back through your strategy list, and hoping to finalize that up over the next couple of months and having that plan ready for you in draft form in the new year. So thank you all very much. And please.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed this. This was a great meeting. My question, and I'm willing to volunteer to help you on this, Andrew. We had 12 people in this room out of a town of 27,000. How can we help to get, this is a big thing for this town, and it's going to change it. How do we help you guys get more people involved at the next meeting to get more information, because anytime we have these big things, the misleading information is unbelievable how people aren't informed. So how do we help you to get this information out there?
Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment. Obviously, this is one of the banes of planners' existences is, getting people to come out to participate in public meetings. And I say that with all due respect because I know people are busy. We all have lives. We've got kids, activities, caring for, our loved ones. Some people, have other things going on. They work in the evening. So there's a lot going on. I understand that not everybody can participate at every meeting. We also were competing with another meeting across town tonight too. So I don't know if that. And a football game. There's a Thursday night football game that Patriots play tonight. That's right. I forgot about that. So, although I feel like this was a bigger draw than the Patriots game, I'm just going to go on a limb and say that this season. I wouldn't have said that a few years ago, but tonight, yes. Maybe a little more interesting. I think, what we could potentially, we'll want to discuss with our partners at MVPC is whether we want to do any additional engagement. I don't know if it's within our scope, and if it's not, maybe we can find a way to work on it to do some online engagement. So we got, for instance, 233 responses on the ADUs. Maybe we can expand the topic, the level of topics that we talk about in an online survey, and extend that out a little bit further to cover some of the things that we talked about tonight.
When do you expect to hear anything about the new initiative of the governor? When would that start to?
You mean, so Stan was asking about the governor's initiative. Are you referring to the ADU mandate? I don't think there's a timeline on that. I think that's probably a larger discussion that's going to take some time. So I don't think it's anytime soon. What I would say, though, is I would not preclude the state from moving forward on that. We have to keep in mind the state did mandate the MBTA communities law. That was under the previous administration. We have a different administration now that's been very clear about their intent to be pro-housing. So I would expect there's going to be a conversation around it. I just don't know how fast it'll move.
This might be an opportunity to have another session.
Yeah, absolutely.
People, try to draw more people in and get them engaged.
But we're going to think a little bit more about how we can get people engaged, and I appreciate the desire to assist with that. So, and I just want to take an opportunity to thank our partners at MVPC for facilitating this meeting, along with our colleagues at the Consensus Building Institute, my colleagues in the planning department, Zach and Jean, and all you for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. I encourage you guys to also reach out to us, the planning office. We're pretty available. I don't have my business cards on me tonight, but we're pretty easy to find. You can call Town Hall. You can look us up on the town's website, Gene, myself, or Zach. Always willing to take a phone call, respond to emails, set up times for in-person meetings, so we can do some one-on-one. And if you know other folks, your neighbors or friends who might want to engage us on these topics, please feel free to have them reach out to us as well. So thanks again.
Thanks.
Any other announcements I'm missing? Okay, great.
Make sure you spend your holiday dinners talking to your friends and family about that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.